Well, hello, John. This is John. John, how are you, John?
Pretty good.
Okay.
Lately, you seem to be getting into different kinds of musical influences on your album. We're talking now about your most recent album,
Walls and Bridges, folks.
Walls and Bridges. And I was wondering, why you got into different things on the album. You always seem to be kind of pure as far as influences, what was going on at the time. And in this album, I hear some jazz, I hear some kind of funky soul influences. What kind of got you into that?
Well, you see, it's only noticeable objectively, you know. I didn't sort of sit down and think I'm going to do a different sound on this album or anything. And I just pulled in the usual musicians with a few added extras, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what happened when we played together.
You mean you didn't go in with a set thing like...
No, I usually have an idea of what the song sounds like, you know.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't go in and think, oh, this is jazzy or this is funky R&B or nothing, you know?
Yeah.
And I just play it by ear, so there was no set plan, and until you said it, I hadn't really thought that it sounded any different. I think I'm just getting better at it, you know?
Uh-huh.
But I didn't consciously think the music was, the influence was any different.
Is a lot of that due to whoever you happen to be playing with at the time?
I think that they do tend to obviously influence a record, you know, but I'm using the people I've used many times before. That's like Jim Keltner and Klaus Voormann and people like that.
Yeah.
I think maybe the horns gave it maybe a touch of jazz, you know?
Yeah, there seemed to be some kind of funky guitar things in there that were, almost soul at times.
Oh, well,
which I hadn't experienced in your music before.
Well, it's probably I hadn't used a guitarist like that before. I used Jesse Ed Davis on this one.
Yeah.
I'd used him on the Harry Nilsson album that I'd produced for Harry. And we'd known each other off and on for years, and I just liked the way he plays, you know. I didn't ever think what style it was.
Yeah.
You know, he just plays sort of sweet guitar, and that's what I like.
I read the other day that you've accepted the fact that you are an ex-Beatle, a fact that for a while you were kind of hostile to the idea.
I think it was a case of divorce pangs, you know?
Yeah.
And now I'm collecting Beatle memorabilia from the Beatle Fest, you know? I mean, that's how it's changed, right?
What kind of changes did you go through to get to that point? When you put out your solo album, you seem to be...
Well, I was like shaking the dust off me, you know?
And then once you got past that point, you can look back at it more objectively now?
Yeah, now I look back at it, you know, with fond memories, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And when we see each other, we're not talking business, you know? We've been seeing a lot of each other this year.
Mm-hmm.
And we've stopped talking business. We seem to have settled the business, and everybody just talks about, you know, didn't we have fun in Hamburg, or remember that day on tour, that kind of stuff. So it's all, like, easy going now.
On your first solo album, you seem to feel very strongly about a lot of things, about the predicament of the world and your predicament, and I thought it was a very emotional album for me to listen to.
Yeah, it was.
And I'm sure for you to record.
Oh, yeah.
How has your art changed since then? Everything seems to be a little lighter now. Is it the same thing? You're a little farther away from those things? And
it's a bit like that. I mean, the first solo album was done just as the Beatles were splitting, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Also, I was in the middle of therapy,
mm-hmm.
and I was really doing a sort of inward trip, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And there's a lot of sort of weird things in there, in all of us, right? Or surprising things, more like it.
I think that album was, to me anyway, that was a masterpiece.
Oh, thank you. That is my favorite sort of piece of work, you know? It's not the kind of thing I sit down and play, you know, for fun.
No, you don't sit down on a sunny day and listen to it to try to get off.
Right.
But I think it captures a lot of things that you were leading to throughout your career with the Beatles that you had kind of attacked in a light manner. I think it all culminated in that album, and to me, that album, I think, is probably one of the 10 best albums I've ever heard, as far as an artistic statement by an artist, you know.
Oh, thanks, John. That's very nice. I think that's a good observation. I think I stopped going to the point of whatever I was getting to in a roundabout way on that album. I just got right down to the nitty-gritty.
Yeah, the production and everything was really key. It gave you the impression that you were in a room with John Lennon, and he was pouring his heart out to you. The production was minimal as far as overdubs and instruments.
I didn't overdub anything.
Yeah, it was a very close album.
There was only 3 musicians on it. You know, there was only 3 people on every track.
Yeah.
And I think it would have it just didn't. Nothing else was called for. You
Right.
know? It wouldn't have worked if I'd put a nice little oboe solo in Mother, you know.
Yeah.
You know, it just wasn't called for. But obviously, I can't be going through such a deep emotional trip all the time, you know. Otherwise, I'd be either a psychiatrist or a shredded wreck.
That was.
You know, I obviously, like anybody else, I go through these things and then I sort of pull myself together, unquotes, which is, you know, not really true. So it could be pulling yourself untogether. But then I have to actually forget about mommy now and then and deal with the world, and then I deal with it like anybody else. So the reason this album probably sounds lighter is because that's just the way I was feeling at this period, you know.
Mm-hmm. Do you feel? Excuse me. Do you feel most in touch with yourself when you were doing, for instance, that first solo album? I kind of have the feeling that at that time you were really aware of what John Lennon was and is, and at other times you kind of fall into the everyday rut that we all fall into sometimes and don't think about that as much.
Yeah, that's true. I call it being awake or being asleep, you know.
Yeah.
And it's sort of, I think I'm awake at this period, but I'm not but still not awake to go and just put a bleeding heart out or a pimple, you know.
Yeah.
Because I have to survive myself, you know. So, but I think, in those terms, awake or asleep, I've been asleep about 2 years, you know.
Do you feel that artists, we're talking art now instead of pop music,
yeah.
Do you feel that artists work best when they have a lot of stress and strain placed? Do you think that that's when they turn out their most creative works?
I think, unfortunately or otherwise, you do get into a creative rut if everything is going rather smoothly, you know.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I think artists somehow have a built-in thing which is slightly self-destructive, which means if it does get cozy, you know, suddenly the instinct is to rip all your clothes off, you know, and create some kind of sensation that you can feel, you know.
Something that brings you back in touch with yourself.
Yeah, and sometimes it's costly, you know, sort of emotionally or physically or anything.
Yeah, the jolt is too much.
That's the only way you can get down to the nitty-gritty, you know.
Right. You seem to attack McCartney now in your first couple solo albums. How do you feel about Paul McCartney now?
This is like a joke. We're just good friends. we're pretty close now. Like I was telling you before, whenever he comes to America, he comes with Linda to see me, and we go eat and we reminisce about old times. And we really both have evolved out of whatever feelings we had when we first split. I think it's a case of we were more scared than we thought. All of us. The fact. However the split happened, being suddenly on your own after 10 years was a pretty scary thing for all of us.
I think you probably turned out the most creative things.
Well, that's nice of you, but I guess it's a matter of opinion.
Well, my point is not to give you a stroke.
Yeah, well, I'll take it.
My point is, do you think McCartney, just from your personal vantage point of what his potential is, and you probably know him better than most people, do you think that he has come along since his first solo album, which I personally was kind of disappointed with?
I think he has. If it hasn't actually happened, he's in the process of freeing himself somehow or other.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it does show in the music, in as much as it's on one level it gets to you right away. I don't mean in a MOR way, you know.
Mm-hmm.
There's definitely something musical happening in his stuff, which I didn't think was happening in the early stuff. Although the music was there, it was just like he had it in an overcoat, you know?
Yeah.
And I think it seems like he's taking his overcoat off now.
Yeah, it didn't seem to grab you, and his stuff, it seems like he's headed in a direction that at least he's conscious of now. He's not...
Yeah, I think it's very awake music, whatever it is, you know? And, I started listening to it again, and I must say I dig a lot of it, you know?
Now, you at one time said that George's album was very nice, but you wouldn't listen to it in your home. Now, I get, again, the feeling... just from listening to your last couple albums, that you are aware of a lot more kinds of music than you used to be. Is that correct or incorrect?
It's probably correct, but it's unconscious, you know. I mean, I listen to the radio, right?
Mm-hmm.
So whatever's going down, that's what I'm hearing.
I like that plug for radio, by the way.
Oh, well, it's a
I'll
pleasure.
I'll
This
give
is
you
John
one-
Lennon on WZMF, Milwaukee. How are you?
WZMF.
Oh, okay. This is John Lennon on WZMF, Milwaukee. What's cooking? You know, I dig radio because it's still, you know, the freest thing besides underground cable TV, which is still a bit limited, you know.
Yeah.
But I dig radio, and that's where I get all my musical information from. I'm not the kind that can sit down and listen to albums, you know, unless I'm at somebody's place and they say, here, listen to this, you know.
Mm-hmm.
So unless I turned the radio on, I wouldn't know what was happening.
Do you take yourself as seriously? Now, this is kind of your awake, asleep thing again, possibly. At one time, you took yourself very seriously as an artist. You compared yourself to Van Gogh, and you took art, the art part of the music business, or whatever you want to call it, very, very seriously.
Yeah.
Do you fluctuate between thinking about that side of it as opposed to the commercial side of it, or are you pretty much always on one side or the other?
No, I do fluctuate, and I don't. The comparison bit, what I was trying to say was that if you really sit down and think about what you're doing as an artist, you're up against some real heavy guys, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or women, just to get that one clear. And it wasn't really comparing myself with Van Gogh, but it's comparing yourself with everything that's gone down in the universe. You know?
Right, that you feel a kind of empathy with other people who have tried to say something. And
Yeah, I definitely do. And Van Gogh, for instance, was something that the auntie that brought me up, you know, always was talking about. You know, she always talked about Van Gogh and Oscar Wilde, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if I refer to an artist, I tend to refer to those people that were sort of, you know, in my consciousness as a child. And, you know, it's really like that. But one of the things I always said was I didn't want to be a Dylan Thomas or you know, not that I really think I'm a Dylan Thomas, but there's two guys, the Irish one, well, I can't remember his name offhand now.
I'm Irish and I can't remember.
Let me think. Brendan Behan.
Yeah.
And Dylan Thomas. Well, they drunk themselves to death, you know, to sort of please everybody, as it were.
Mm-hmm.
And the instinct I've always had, although I always empathize with artists and the purity of them,